totally grew up a believer. Some of my earliest memories ever were being in church. I remember going every week with my family. I remember sitting through 2 hour sermons as a kid. And I remember one of the first things about any first memories I ever had is that I learned the Lord's Prayer when I was probably about 3 or 4 in church. Remember, we went every week, went for all the holidays. It was a big part of our life, and it was a big part of my parents' life as well. My parents sat on pretty much every board or every committee that you could have at the church, and it was just a part of our life every day.
I grew up as a believer in as much as I could be a believer as a small child through elementary, middle school, and high school years. I thought believing in God was about obedience and being a good girl who followed the rules whenever I was at church, home, or school. Obviously, I was not perfect, but I did do a pretty good job of following the rules. I remember sitting in church and taking in the ceremony and the robes and the tradition of it all, and singing hymns and sitting by my parents and people I knew and loved in my small country church that I went to. I'm certain that my mind wandered often, as I'm sure that many people's minds do wander. I grew up in the Catholic faith. I took catechism classes after church, and I went to Mass. I did my first communion and my confirmation, both wearing a white dress and being very proud of what I had accomplished to remember and learn so that I could do those ceremonial events. I sang in the church choir for many years at midnight Mass. I did that with my mom and my cousins and other kids and women that I knew. And I participated in a youth group after I got a little older in middle school, high school, I think. And I went to a church that was nearby us for the youth group. So I knew some of the kids from school, but it broadened my horizons a little bit because it wasn't just people that had been in my church. And so in youth group, we performed something called the Way of the Cross, which was about Jesus's death and resurrection and the stations of the cross. And we went around to other schools and performed that. I was a small role. I played a person in the crowd. I remember that having a big impact on me because it was helping my learning and understanding of the Bible, as well as doing something that taught other people. I remember that we did a fasting overnight at one of the parents of the youth group's house, and I remember watching a scary movie, which is odd, but I remember making sure that we just drank juice and that having an impact upon me. I also went to church weekly because my parents did, and it was expected of me, and I didn't really rebel against it. I felt a sense of safety in just following the rules. It was a part of my identity being Catholic. Many other people I knew were Catholic. Most of the people I knew were Catholic. I did not go to Catholic school. My mom had 9 brothers and sisters and 5 stepbrothers and stepsisters, and my dad had 6 brothers and sisters. About half of my mom's family were members of our church, so their family, which was quite big families at the time. So they were all part of the church I grew up in, and so that affected my feeling a part of things and being in a familiar community where I was accepted and felt a sense of belonging. I didn't always feel a sense of belonging at school. I loved gathering on the parking lot after church, mostly on Sunday mornings, studying the catechism book, I don't remember picking up a Bible very much, but I remember that catechism book. I would do things like remember the Ten Commandments, the Seven Sacraments, the rote prayers, and then going home to eat breakfast and watch Star Trek, followed by Lone Ranger or whatever Western was on at the time. It was a routine, comfortable, and safe. I assisted a friend of mine who was a year or two older than me teach a Sunday school class in high school. I don't remember doing too much other than passing out papers. I watched people get married in that church, have funeral services, get buried in the nearby cemetery, and in the church hall and outside were 4 H meetings, family reunions, egg hunts, dances, receptions. Church was a big part of my life. I knew very little about other faiths. I went to some sort of Christian outreach thing with friends in middle school when I stayed overnight. Maybe I attended a wedding or two that was not Catholic. No real exposure to anything else until I went to college.
Grew up in a Christian home, and the answer is yes, I grew up in a Christian home. Some of you may know that my father was a pastor, so my mother would get myself and my 2 sisters up on Sunday mornings, and if she ever heard us complain about getting up early or saying it was important to go because my father was the pastor, she would always remind us, we don't go to church because your father is a pastor. We go to church because that's who we are. And so it was very clear that my parents were believers, and they raised us in faith, and they put us in activities and engaged us in opportunities that would help encourage us in our own faith development.
So, the first question that I asked everybody is, and that I'm asking myself right now, is did you grow up a believer? And the answer to that is no, I did not grow up a believer. I grew up in a household that was pretty far from what you would call believers, or even Christians, or even having any faith. I think until I was about 10 years old, maybe even a little bit before that, because I don't remember exactly when my great-grandma died, but about the time we stopped going to any church at all by about the time my great-grandma died. And before that, the only time we went to church was we went once a year to this little charismatic church in Eufaula, Oklahoma on Easter. And the only thing that I remember from this is the preacher. I didn't know what the term pastor was yet, but the preacher would always talk about the stone being rolled away. And that's my earliest memory of church. And like I said, I had that same experience for about, I probably remember 5 or 6 years of it, because we would do that, and then we would go do the egg hunt. And so that's what I kind of always associated with church. The only other experience that I had with church was when I was about I don't say 3rd or 4th grade. A friend of mine invited me to a local Baptist church, and things did not go well for me. They went really great for a while. They were doing a program called Awanas, which is like, for those of you who don't know, it's like Christian Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, I guess. I don't know. They had uniforms and all that stuff. But anyway, the moment that I remember is we were playing a game, and everything was going smoothly, and it was like a skipping game in their fellowship hall. And then I got pulled aside and accused of making an obscene gesture, which I didn't do. I absolutely did not do it, but they insisted that not only did I for sure do it, but that I had to apologize to the person that I did it to. And I never went back to that church. In fact, because of that episode, I kind of started to not believe. I kind of started to become a person who just doubted that God existed at all. So that's kind of what growing up not in the church was like. It was weird though, because in my area where I grew up, most people went to church. And so by not going to church, it kind of put me in conflict with the rest of my social circle, because I was just that kid whose parents didn't go to church or weren't Christian, and there was a lot of judgment because of that.